Hey everyone, and we're going to give just another minute or two to make sure that everybody can get on before we get started. Okay. All right, it looks like we have a good amount of people in here, so I'm going to get the meeting going. So for those of you that don't know, HAE, we are a global nonprofit organization with over 15,000 members, really dedicated to the supporting of experienced and aspiring entrepreneurs. This new workshop series is really purposed to guide startups through some of the most difficult challenges that they face, whether it's fundraising, marketing, tax incentives, finance, which leads me to introduce Saniya. She is today's guest and she loves to travel. A fun fact about her, she's been to 50 countries in her life. And so with that said, I'm going to pass the stage over to Saniya so that she can tell you a little bit more about fundraising as a startup.
Thank you so much, Corey. Let me go ahead and share my screen. Actually, it's disabled, so whenever you get a chance, if you can enable it, I'll share my presentation. But yeah, it's really great to be here. My name is Saniya Shah. I'm the current CEO and co-founder at Startup Angels. And today I really want to focus my presentation on some of the early stage first time founder advice tips, as well as some fundraising advice and tips. I did get a list of questions from Corey prior to this, so I did my best to weave them in. But of course, if anyone has any questions, I'm going to leave plenty of time at the end so that we can go through them. So looks like I'm able to share my screen now. Hopefully everybody can see the screen. I think I just got muted. Yeah, let's just go ahead and get started. Here is the general agenda for today. So I'm going to start with an introduction, then we're going to go into some early day founder advice. And then from there, we're going to talk a little bit about fundraising and then finally open it up for questions. So again, I think it's really important for any time a founder is giving advice to another founder or a founder is receiving advice that you understand the context in which the advice is coming from and the perspective in which it's coming from, because every founder journey is unique and the things that work for some might not work for others. And so that being said, my name is Saniya. I'm a four-time founder. I was recently named onto the Forbes 30 Under 30. I'm also a TEDx speaker. I love speaking. I've gone and given presentations at lots of universities around the country, and I am a Cornell MBA alumni. I actually grew up in New Hampshire, and you might not think that New Hampshire would have a thriving entrepreneurship ecosystem, but when I was growing up, my parents actually moved here from India and they started their business when I was a baby. And so I basically got to see that business grow as I grew up. And I was exposed to entrepreneurship from literally day one of my life. And so that obviously had a huge impact in my mindset and how I sort of looked at the world. And in high school is when I actually started my first company. One of the biggest problems that we were facing back when I was in high school in regards to the environment was those huge computer monitors were being thrown out in the millions and being replaced with flat screen monitors. And so I actually built a company centered around reusing and recycling those giant monitors. And so that was my first taste of entrepreneurship before I attended Boston University, where I got my engineering degree. So I'm a little bit familiar with the Boston, Cambridge area. I love it, miss it, and hopefully we'll go back there. After that, I actually graduated and worked at Optum. So many people don't recognize the name Optum. It's part of United Healthcare. It's actually their health tech company, their sister company. And in that company, I was still very interested in entrepreneurship and innovation. And so I actually joined their innovation incubator. And what that was it was a whole department that was focused on creating and launching new products for the company. Essentially, lots of mini startups within this big company and funded by this big company. And so there I got the experience of creating, launching, testing, and even fundraising within the company and pushing out these large scale products. And doing that, I learned a lot about entrepreneurship, and I actually launched my second company, Kahani. I launched this company as a virtual event choreography company because I love dancing. And in South Asian weddings, dance is a huge part of the festivities. And so I created a company that allowed families and friends to learn these awesome dances without being in the same place at the same time. And then after that, I was still feeling like I needed to learn more about entrepreneurship, about business. I had a very technical background going to BU studying engineering. And I also felt that my network was pretty limited in the business world. And so that's when I decided to go to Cornell Tech's MBA program, where they taught basically how to get a tech MBA, which is how to pair your technical skills with the business world. And that's actually where I met the co-founders for my third company, Pilota. Pilota is an artificial intelligence machine learning company for the travel space that works to eliminate risk using these artificial intelligence technologies. And so at this company, I learned a lot because this was a venture funded company. As opposed to my last two companies, we raised a lot of money. We put out products with great companies. We got the full startup experience through this. And I think I learned some of the challenges that you face as this early stage venture backed startup. And I also really found value in different communities. So very similar to HAE, I joined a lot of different startup communities, including Durham Fund, 500 Startups, and Plug and Play, where we got exposed to a whole different group of different types of founders, different types of mentors, different types of investors, people that could give you advice and support you on your founder journey. Because being a founder can be a very isolating experience. And you don't have all the answers because you have to do every different phase of the company you have to deal with, and you don't necessarily have all of those answers. And so I found that joining these types of communities really, really helped. And that's why I really love what you guys are doing with HAE and how important that really is as a founder to have that kind of network that you can go and rely on and get the advice and support that you need. And these communities were actually a huge inspiration to why I decided to leave Pilota and start a new company called Startup Angels. So one of the biggest pain points that I heard from other founders, and I felt myself as a founder, was in those early days, you have all of these startup expenses and all of these things that you have to put your own savings and own money into just to get yourself off the ground. And if only there was some kind of way that you could have your friends and family who really want to support you actually support you in these meaningful ways. And so I actually left Pilota with another co-founder, and we started this company called Startup Angels, where our mission is to give early stage startups the boost that they need. And what we do is we allow startup founders to create their own business registries. So they can say like, hey, for my company, like I really need this computer monitor. I really need AWS credits. I really need some Facebook ad credits, some Zendesk credits, and they can allow their friends and family to fulfill it in this way. And so this was a problem I faced myself as a founder, and I heard from numerous other founders. And so that's how we created this company. So now let's go into some of the early stage startup advice. I know somebody asked any advice for first-time founders. Well, I'm actually about to go through a lot of advice for first-time founders. And so hopefully you guys find it helpful. One of the biggest pieces of advice I could give to anyone, which hopefully this isn't the first time that you're hearing it, is to validate before building. So lots and lots and lots of founders fall into this trap where they have a wonderful idea and then they just start building it. And then they start putting in time and money and resources into building this product without doing any kind of validation on it. And so what's really, really important, and I can't stress this enough, is to validate that your idea is something that people want, that people are looking for, and to get the user feedback on your idea before you start building. Because chances are the idea you have in your head and the product that you end up with at the end of the day are going to be two very different things. And I think a lot of people usually ask, how can you validate an idea if you haven't built it already? So there's lots of different ways that you can actually go about validating your idea before building. And so I'm going to give you a few examples to keep this practical and not very high level. So say, for example, you want to build a meal prep app because you love meal prepping, you think it's something that's a standard practice of many working professionals' lives, and but you're not sure if this is an app or a product that other people who meal prep would use. So what I would suggest doing to go and validate your idea is to seek out Reddit groups or Facebook groups where people who meal prep are coming together and chatting about meal prep. And you'd be surprised, but in this day and age, there's pretty much a subreddit or a Facebook group about pretty much every topic. So what you want to do is go and find those groups and then don't go in there and ask like, "Hey, I'm going to build this app, would you guys buy it?" What you want to do is you want to start getting feedback. So you can say something like, "Hey, I'm trying to find a tool to stay organized with my meal plans. Does anyone have one that they've used that they found and it's helped them?" And in this way, you get really organic feedback about an idea like this. And you'll get responses like, "Oh yeah, I use this tool. It's awesome. I love like using tools to stay organized," or like, "No, I don't really like using a tool. I sort of just do it all myself." You'll get very organic feedback. And so let's say the feedback is very positive, like, "Yes, I love using tools for my meal prepping." The next thing you could do is build your own like spreadsheet template, which is like a very low fidelity prototype of this app you want to build. And then throw that spreadsheet into those same groups and say like, "Hey guys, like I actually built this spreadsheet and it's been awesome with keeping myself organized. If anyone wants to download it, I'm throwing it up here. Feel free to download it." And you can add some kind of link where you can track how many people are downloading the spreadsheet. And that will tell you whether or not people are actually interested in some kind of tool or some kind of platform that's very similar to what you're about to put a lot of time and resources and energy into. And it allows you to validate whether this is the right idea or get user feedback as to why it's not the best idea and how you can improve it before building. We actually did something very similar with Pilota. So what we did, since Pilota's um, core target market was B2B, not B2C, is we were targeting travel management companies. So we posed when we were students at Cornell. So we just called up lots of travel management companies in the New York City area. We said, "Hey, we're students and we're doing a research project, and we'd love to know more about how you handle flight disruptions." And we'd get them on the phone. They would be talking to us because they thought we were students, and they would tell us all this information that was extremely helpful and helped us validate our business idea. This next piece of advice is very similar. So I can't stress enough how important it is to constantly be testing your product. So you need to always be getting user feedback. So whether that means doing user testing with your different prototypes of your product or making A/B tests. So as you roll out your product, you can start testing out different features in different ways or even simulations. Always have some kind of testing framework that's established as you're building your product. So you can make sure that every iteration of what you're building is what your users want, not what you think your users want. My third piece of advice is to really look into growth hacking methods. So I think in school, especially when I was in business school, you're taught a lot of traditional marketing methods for how to build a company. And those are really great for really large scale companies. But when you're a startup, you have a very limited budget and you want to make sure that every dollar is helping you convert in some way, shape, or form. And so that's why it's really important to just do some research on growth hacking. Um, I would go into like specific growth hacking methods, but they actually vary depending on your industry, your target customer, et cetera. But if you just do a quick Google search of growth hacks for B2B companies, you'll find tons and tons of different articles and actual growth hacks that other founders have used to get their first 100 or 1,000 customers. And there's some really cool stories of how people have literally used growth hacks to save their companies, how they've used it to spread the word. Like I think Tinder or Bumble, they had someone go into some crowded college area and then had someone spill a bunch of ping pong balls with the logo of their company on it or the QR code to download the app or something like that. And they got like hundreds of downloads through that method. Or they had people go onto college campuses and like go into classrooms and like say something really disruptive that basically triggered people to go and check out their app. And so there's things like that, but then there's also a lot of like B2B methods like retargeting campaigns or ways to find your target customer without specifically spending that money on Facebook ads that you can find online from other founders to better use your marketing budget. The next piece of advice I have is to spend your time networking rather than cold emailing. Again, I want to put in a reminder that this is my personal advice based on my own experiences. So again, your experience might be different. But what I found was you could spend hours finding these email lists with 500 people and trying to send out these cold email drip campaigns to try to get them to convert. Or what you could do is identify like your 5 top companies or 5 target clients that you want to reach, and then spend your time finding how you're connected to those people and get those introductions, because those introductions are way more powerful than your 10 cold emails that you're going to send them. And being in the Harvard network, the likelihood of you having someone that can connect you to the person that you're trying to reach is very high. And so one trick you could use that I used myself was you can actually go on LinkedIn or actually go on Google and type linkedin.in and then the position of your target buyer. So for us, it was travel management company CTO, and then followed by Harvard, or for me, it was Cornell. And you'll actually get a whole list of people who are your buyers who went to Harvard or went to Cornell. And you can reach out to those people, and the odds of those people responding to you are very, very high. And the odds of you getting an introduction through them are very high. And those introductions will be way more powerful for you than just a bunch of cold emails. My next piece of advice, so I have 2 more quick pieces of advice. Every second matters when you're a founder. So when you're a founder, you're going to get bombarded with lots of emails about like different pitch competitions and different webinars and investors who are like Series C investors who just want an intro to you. And I would just advise you to be cautious about how you spend your time, because really every second matters, especially if you're doing this full time. And you need to make sure that you have your priorities set with your teammates and with your company, and the way that you spend your time every day aligns with those priorities and not something that seems like exciting or flashy. And stay organized. So when you're first starting a company, it's very tempting to like just do everything ad hoc, like write down your passwords on like notepads and like write down your expenses in some notebook that you're going to lose in 2 weeks. If you're serious about starting your company, stay organized from day one, because a year from that day one, you're going to have to be filing your taxes. You're going to have to be giving investors reports. And if you don't have the right numbers or right information, you're going to spend hours trying to figure that stuff out. So from day one, if you're serious about your company, you got to stay organized. And finally, don't be afraid to ask for help. I think a lot of founders sometimes feel like they have to do it all on their own, especially female founders. And I've fallen into this trap myself. But I would say insert yourself into lots of different communities just like this, where you have lots of people that you can reach out to for help, and ask for that help when you feel that you can't handle it yourself. So I've also gathered some of the questions that I got from everyone that seemed to align with what I just spoke about. So I'm going to go through those as well right now. One of those questions was, what traction do you like to see in startups that pique your attention? So I know from lots of different investors that the biggest thing that they try to look for in these early stage startups is, how bad is the problem that you're trying to solve? And why is your solution the right solution to this really intense problem? Because at an early stage company, I mean, there's so many different factors of how this company could succeed or not succeed. But if you're solving a problem that's bad enough and your solution is hitting all of the right points, that's going to pique their attention. The second thing is, what are the most important attributes for a pre-revenue startup? So if you're going for venture funding, market size is a huge one. The second thing that most investors look for is your team. Why is your team the right team to be solving this problem? What skills do you bring to the table that another team is not going to bring to the table? The third is, again, what is your problem and what's your solution? Why is your problem something that needs to be solved? Is this a nice to have, or is this a we need this right now? And then finally, differentiation. What's stopping the next group of 3 founders or 2 founders from doing exactly this? And then the third question I got was, can you suggest some strategies for finding co-founders? So I actually have helped a few of my friends find co-founders. And what I always suggest to them is if you're someone who's looking for someone to create a new idea with and build something from scratch in a partnership, what you want to do is you need to, if there's a certain industry you're in, you need to find meetups for those sorts of topics, and you need to go to those kinds of events. So whether they're small conferences, whether they're like meetups that are happening online, whether it's a Reddit thread, whether it's a Facebook group, you need to insert yourself in the discussions that are happening in those communities. And right now, Clubhouse is also a really great one for that. If you're someone who has an idea, you're pretty sure on the validation, and you just need someone to fill a skill gap. So if you're like someone who does the business side and you need someone technical to build it out, and you're just looking to essentially hire a co-founder almost, that's when you need to use resources like AngelList and put out exactly the kind of co-founder you're looking for there. And people will essentially apply in that way. And then you can go through different resumes to see which one best fits your the skills that you're looking to pair yours with. Again, like picking your co-founder is probably the most important decision you're going to make for your company. And so don't just pick one right off the bat. You need to get to know them, spend a lot of time getting to know them, ask for references if they're a complete stranger to make sure that this is going to be a partnership that lasts. All right, so I think it's time to get into fundraising. So there were a lot of questions here, and again, I tried to sprinkle them in. So before you even think about fundraising, there's a lot of questions that you need to ask yourself. I think right now in this world, people think, oh, I have a startup. Okay, I need to go out and raise $1 million or $10 million. But the truth is most startups, you don't even need to do that. You can bootstrap it yourself. You can find other methods. And so what's important is to look at your timeline and look at your priorities. So you need to look at what's your business model looking like. You need to look at what's your revenue model going to be. What are your costs going to be? Ask yourself questions like, what do the next 3, 6, and 12 months look like for my business? What are the costs going to be for the next year to run my business? Do I have to invest in a lot of heavy machinery? Do I have to invest in a lot of software products? Where are my costs going to be for my business? The third is, what's your revenue model? So is this a kind of company where you have to spend hundreds of thousands of dollars in research and then finally you make your first dollar? Or is this something that you can spend $1,000 on and start making revenue from day 30? Finally, what do you need to get done to see your first dollar? How much work and how much money needs to go in before you can start making revenue? So before you even go out for funding, ask yourself questions like this. Ask yourself questions about your business, your revenue model, and your costs. And then when you have those answers, then take a look at what are your options. So there are lots of different options aside from venture funding. The first is if you have the means to pay it out of your savings. If this is a company that you just have to put in $5,000 and then you can start making revenue. If this is something that you're opening up a studio and you need $20,000 to do so, you could try to do it out of your savings. The second is asking angels, friends, or family for angel investments. So again, if this is something that you don't need hundreds of thousands of dollars to build, this can be a great way to get the money that you need to support yourself to get to the point of either revenue coming in or going in for venture funding. The third, which is not something that I typically recommend, but is an option that's on the table, and many startups have done so, like Airbnb, I believe, did this, is taking out loans and using credit cards. So if you're very confident that your startup is going to succeed, you can use credit cards and loans and have to be liable for paying that money back when your company gets successful. And the fourth is platforms for crowdfunding. So if you're building out like a physical product, you can put yourself on a crowdfunding site and get money from your potential customers. This is a really good way, especially if you're going to go for venture funding down the line, to show traction and show that people really want your product. There were a lot of questions about venture funding, and especially what are the different stages. So when you're an early stage startup, there are two stages that you typically will fall into. It's either pre-seed or seed. And so I'm just going to go through them. So if you are raising between 50K to around 250, sometimes even 500K, you qualify as pre-seed. If you're a seed company, you're typically raising a little bit more. So that can be 500K. And nowadays it goes upwards of like $3 million, $4 million. And then if you're a pre-seed company, you have some kind of like MVP, you validated your product and your market in some kind of way. If you're a seed company, this is something where you already have shown product market fit, you have something that's getting traction, and you have a team that can take this company to the next level. For pre-seed, if your valuation is probably around $1 million to $3 million, for seed, it's around $5 million to $15 million. For pre-seed, the target runway, so you're raising money to last you about half a year to 9 months. For seed, you're raising money to last you about a year and a half. For pre-seed, those typical investors are going to be friends, family, accelerators, crowdfunding, or angel investors. There are a few pre-seed investors as well. For seed, those are usually angel and institutional investors, although nowadays platforms like Republic are doing really well. So if you have something that will do well with crowdfunding, that's an option as well. So here are some of the questions that I got. I'm doing my first startup. What's the quickest, most efficient way to find funding for an early stage startup? If you have the means, bootstrapping it and putting in your savings is the quickest and most efficient way to do it. Any other method is going to require lots of time and energy. The second quickest, most efficient way is angels and friends and family, because they already are people who likely believe in you or believe in the industry if you're going the angels route. And so they require less convincing. If you're going the venture stage route, that's going to take a lot of time and a lot of energy. Questions 2 and 3 I answered in the last slide. And then the fourth question was, when is it worth raising money? So this is a tough question. I think number one, if you're going for a venture-backed business, you have to make sure you're a venture scalable business. So is this a company that's going to make $2 billion, $3 billion, $10 billion? And it's okay if the answer is no. You could have a really awesome cash flow positive business and not have to raise money. If you're not going to be a company that's aiming to be a unicorn, you don't need to go and get venture funding. Instead, you can go for angels or loans or friends and family. The reason it's good to go for a VC firm is, one, they can provide you lots of advantages. So if you are, for example, we were a travel company, there were a lot of firms that focused on travel companies and had these amazing connections into the industry and could get us deals that we couldn't get us ourselves. So that's a really good one. The second one is speed. So if you are raising VC money and you get $1 million in your company, you can do things a lot faster than if you're funding it from your savings. And 3 is obviously necessity. So if your company needs that cash influx, then that's when it's right to go and get money. Sourcing investors, there were a lot of questions on this one. So sourcing investors, you got to do your research about your industry and your stage. There are tons and tons and tons of lists online and databases where you can search for investors. But the important thing is, once you have your list of investors in your industry and in your stage, is to figure out how you're connected to those people. Find out like what degree of separation away are they from you, and who are those people who can get you those connections. Are there groups that you can join? Are there people that you can get in touch with? How can you get an introduction to that investor? And then the third is to create your own investor pipeline CRM. So this is a tool that one of my advisors showed me, which I'm going to show you guys in a second. But first, I'm going to answer these questions. So how do you find investors that are interested in the sector that your startup serves? The best way to do this is to find your competing companies or companies that are similar to you or sort of complements to your company, and look at who funded them. Go on Crunchbase and see who led their rounds, see who funded their rounds. And then those are the best ways to sort of start your research about who are the investors that are likely going to be interested in you. Obviously, someone who invested in your direct competitor is not going to invest in you. But if you find someone in your industry, then you look at who invested in them. That's the best starting point. The second is, what criteria should founders use in choosing the right investors? So this is a very personal question. I'm going to give the best answer I can to it. The things that I personally look for is, how involved do you want the investors to be? So I was someone who didn't want the investors to be like hovering on top of us all the time. And I wanted them to give us a little bit of freedom, and different investors have different theses on this. And that's a question you can ask them, is how involved are you going to be in my company? The second is, what advantages do they provide to you? You don't want to take money from someone like, if you don't want to take money from a VC that's not going to provide you any kind of advantage. That VC needs to either be making these amazing connections for you, providing these great resources for you, or filling some sort of hole that you guys have in your skills or anything like that. And then finally, do you feel that you're going to basically work well with this kind of person? These VCs aren't just going to write you a check and walk away. These VCs are going to be constantly asking you questions, getting on calls with you, and working with you. So if you don't think that you get along with their personalities, then you shouldn't take money from them. All right, so we're almost to the end, and I'm almost going to open it up for questions. I just want to share this quick Excel template with you guys of how I kept my own CRM for sourcing investors. So there's a lot of companies that will try to sell you investor CRMs, but you can make one yourself. And all you have to do is get an Excel sheet and add these different pieces to it. So what you want to do is write down what's the fund name for the VC, who is the investor that you want to talk to there. Different investors within different funds will have different specialties. So find the investor that specializes in what you need. The third is, what's the size of the fund? The fourth is, what's their average check size? Because when you're putting together a round, you need to make sure that you're going to investors that are going to write the right check size for you. The fifth is, who do they lead? They'll usually write that on their website if they lead or not. And you want to start with finding your lead and then finally fill in the gaps with the rest of the investors. What are their fund themes? So this will help you make sure that this is the right fit for you. Who are the relevant portfolio companies that make you think that this is the right investor for you? What was the last time you contacted them? Or once you start contacting, you can start filling this in. What is the email address for this person? Where are they located? And then finally, you can add in who can intro you so that when you are ready to reach out, you have that person there. And as you're writing your emails, you can always go back and reference like, hey, remember when this person introduced us? I would love to get to know you. Once you have all of that stuff written down, you then can go through and tier all the investors. So you can say like, here are my top choices, here are my second choices, here are my third choices, here are my fourth choices, and put all your investors into different buckets. So that way, you know, like, okay, here are my top choices. I'm going to talk to these people last, and I'm going to start from my last choices so that I can get all those awkward interactions out of the way, get all the questions that I haven't prepared for out of the way, and get used to the rhythm of going through investor meetings, and then work yourself up your tiers. All right, so someone asked, what's the most important quality that a founder should look for when approaching someone to be their lead investor? So again, this is very similar to the last question I answered. How involved do you want them to be? What advantages can they provide to you? And can you work well with their style of leadership? I would definitely, if you're a founder who's going to get a term sheet from an investor, ask to talk to the portfolio companies, ask to hear about what the experience has been like for those portfolio companies. So that way you can see how those companies like working with the investor and whether or not it was worth it for them to take those checks. All right, this is my last slide, I believe. So preparing for those investor meetings. So what you want to do is you and your team, you need to go through a list of all the hypothetical questions that they might ask you, all the different uncertainties that you have, and prepare for the questions you're going to get about them. And you need to come up with a list of answers. And every time you go through a meeting, you need to go back to that document, update it with any new questions you got, and revise any answers that didn't go well. Like I said on the last slide, make sure you schedule your lower priority meetings first and get those conversations out of the way and learn from them so that by the time you get to your top tier of investors, you're ready to go. Always try to get introductions through portfolio companies. If you can, try to get to know founders in your industry. Try to keep in touch with them because I know when I was in the travel industry, we got to know a lot of the founders that were also in the travel industry, and they made awesome connections for us with investors. And if a portfolio company is introducing you to an investor, that's the best kind of introduction you can get. And then finally, like I said, always have to speak with portfolio companies if you're further along in the process. So I got these two questions. What do you look for in a 30-minute introductory meeting with a company looking for pre-seed funding? So I can tell you from my experience of going through hundreds of investor meetings, what the main things that they look for is, how good is your team? Why is your team the team to solve this problem? How big is the market? what makes you different and why will someone not be able to copy you, and how intense is this problem? And then I got this question of how are there any funds dedicated for female founders? So there are so many funds that are dedicated to female founders now. Um, there's a Female Founders Fund, Amplifier Ventures, BBG Ventures, Bumble Fund. You can find lists of these online. The best way to contact them is honestly going to events that are focused on female founders, because likely they're going to be there because they're also looking for great founders to invest in. So if you don't have any connections into these funds, try to go to events that are focused towards female pitch competitions or female companies or female founded companies, because more than likely they're going to be there. So that is my prepared presentation for today. But like I said, I really want to leave time for questions. And if you guys want to connect with me at all after this, you can feel free to reach out to me on LinkedIn or email me at our Startup Angels email, and I'd be happy to answer any of your questions there as well.
Great. So at this time, feel free to drop any questions you have in the Zoom chat. We have one currently by Bert. He says, I would say my contacts are 50% whether they will introduce me to a VC. And networking to VCs is very time consuming. The few VCs I have cold emailed and responded is 80%. I am thinking of giving up on my contacts and just cold emailing going forward. I suspect VC industries have shifted. It is no longer dominated by HBS and Stanford grads. The networks are much more loose. What are your thoughts on this?
So cold emails aren't super well received by the VC, so they may respond to you, but the introduction doesn't feel as urgent to them as one that comes from a portfolio company or someone they know. If you're in a situation where you feel that your network isn't going to help you get the introductions, then I think that you should spend some time putting yourself into different founder communities. So this is a really great one. There's a lot of them. If you search the different like founder Slack, there's tons of great Slack groups as well with lots and lots of founders that are more than happy to introduce you to different investors. As well as try to reach out to the founders of portfolio companies that are very similar to you. Founders are usually very receptive to talking to other founders. And I wouldn't phrase it as like, hey, I want an intro to this person. Can we meet? More of like, hey, I'd love to just chat a little bit about being a founder in this industry. I have some questions I'd love to ask you, and come prepared with a lot of other questions. But then at the end, you could say, like, by the way, we're raising money. I saw that you got a check from XYZ firm. Would you mind putting in an introduction to us? One, that's a really great way to get to know people in your industry. And two, it's a great way to get a better introduction than a cold email. And it's a much better use of your time. I see a few more questions in the chat. What do you think about venture pitching events that charge a fee to pitch? So I'm not a huge fan of these. There were a few that approached us. If they're asking you to pay to pitch, then you should know exactly the kind of benefit you're going to get from that. If it feels like it's just going to be like a networking event, then I would suggest not going and pitching at that event at first. Try to maybe attend for free and see what the event is like, and then pay to pitch. I wouldn't necessarily recommend a pay to pitch event. Sorry, there's a lot of them coming in here. What do you think about, oh, sorry. Where can I get a list of reputable seed funding firms? You can honestly Google it. There's a website that I'm losing the name right now, but I would search, if you search investor database, investor CRM, there's a lot of different websites that put together these lists of investors for you. And so more than likely, if you literally just Google it, you'll get a list. And then from there, you can just go through and quickly research them to see what their activity looks like, to see if they're reputable or not. I think Crunchbase as well allows you to search for investors. I'm not super sure on that right now. Okay, there's a lot of questions coming in. So there's somebody who is developing a product, a health tech funding product. They're looking for health tech funding. Where do they start searching for funding? My business model is brick and mortar and digital health interventions. Like I said, the best way to find investors is you look at the companies that are similar to you. Find companies that are in your space and then see who invested in them, because investors are always actively seeking out people in their industry. And so if you look at like find a list of 10 companies that are in your industry and then look at who funded them. And that's your best starting point for finding investors in your space. From there, it'll just be a chain reaction where you'll find more and more and more just by looking into them. Any info resources on common term structures for friends and family. So again, take this with a grain of salt because this is my advice. I and almost every founder that I know has used the YC Safe template to when raising a friends and family round. Again, this depends on your company and your future funding plans, but it's a really good template to use if you're raising friends or family funding. How do you approach corporates, which could be a potential customer or competitor? So this I'm not quite sure on. Is this asking about, I'm not, if you could elaborate on your question, I'd be happy to answer that. Any recommendations about financing sources, investors in AI, mental health, and entertainment? So those are three separate industries, and all three have so many investors. We were an AI company and a travel company, so we looked at investors in both. If you're in all three of these spaces, you can look at investors in all three. You can find tons of lists online of people who specialize in investing in AI or mental health or entertainment. Again, the best way to do this, and I feel like I keep repeating myself, is finding companies that are similar to you and seeing who invested in them. From there, especially if you're looking on Crunchbase or any of these other platforms, you'll find lots of lists of similar investors to the ones that you're researching, and that's how you can start compiling your lists. Are referrals or intros typically compensated or otherwise rewarded? Is that a common expectation of the person being asked? No, I've never paid for an introduction. It's a little bit strange if they're asking to get paid for it. What's commonly expected is being asked in a nice way, obviously doing that person a favor should they need a favor moving forward. If you're asking for an intro, always be open and say, I'm happy to introduce you to anyone who might be helpful in my network. What advice do you have on a pitch deck? Do you recommend pitch deck not be emailed prior to an in-person meeting? I mean, for a pitch deck, obviously make sure that you're doing a good job with putting it together in a way that makes you seem presentable and answers all of the right questions. Before emailing your pitch deck to anyone, I would run through it with a lot of advisors that you have, any other investor friends that you have, any friends that you have that are in your industry, just to get any advice on it. I would also recommend sending it in a way that you can track how many times it's opened. So whether that's like DocuSend or even like Google link, where you can check the metrics on it, it's really helpful. And I think emailing it before a meeting is totally fine. Do you have any advice about investors in the art gallery startups? So unfortunately, I don't know anyone in the art gallery startup space, but again, looking at other companies in that space, because I feel like that is kind of an up and coming area, will help you find investors in that space. What's your opinion of obtaining seed capital from large companies in your startup sector? I think it's awesome to do that, and it's a really great signal in your company. But when doing that, you need to make sure that there's no exclusivity. So if, for example, NVIDIA wants to invest in you, you have to make sure that they're not saying that by investing in you, you can only sell to them, and they have any sort of say about who else you can sell to. Because that's a big thing with corporate investments. What are some strategies you recommend to reduce legal costs for early stage startups? There's a lot of schools have programs. There's a lot of startup programs for pairing up and coming early stage startups with people who are doing like law clinics where you can sort of get free legal advice. So I'm not sure if the HA offers any perks that are like that. But if not, you can join a lot of different other founder communities. Like I would seek them out. There's tons of Slack groups for founder communities, and there's lots and lots of free legal clinics that you can get free legal advice through. What was the name of that template? So that's actually a template that I made. I called it the investor template. I believe that this is being recorded, and so you can just take a screenshot of it through the recording and then recreate it. Oh, the Y Combinator template. Yeah, so it's the YC Safe. If you just Google YC Safe investment vehicle or investment document, you'll find it online. It's a safe investment, which means that the money they put in doesn't immediately get translated into equity. It actually translates into equity when you raise your first official financing round or have a significant event. I don't know how much, where are we on time, Corey? I just want to make sure that.
Well, we just have a few minutes left, and I really want to say this has been terrific, right? And the piece that you're replying to question, it's incredible. So thank you so much. Guys, today is the first of a series of perks. So at HIE, we understand that you as early stage funder need advice as well as have access to discounted tools and software and opportunities. And this is why Saniya is here today. She is part of our perks offering. You can go on our website and see a list of all the perks. And every Thursday now, I believe for almost 8 weeks, we have an event where we have an expert like Saniya coming and answering your question and telling you a little bit about startup life. And most importantly, find out what she offers with her tool, because what many of you might be looking for at this early stage is not funding right away, but it's just friends and family that might can help and support you. For example, let's say it is your birthday. You can, instead of just getting clothes, you can get your friends and family giving you perks through Startup Angels stream. Okay, so find out more about our perks offering. This is just the first of a series of events. Sometimes, and I am a funder myself, we focus so much on looking for funding that we waste time, especially in the early stage when we are not ready for funding yet, when we can just ask for help to friends and family for things like, I don't know, Adobe license, if you need it, or AWS credits, okay?
Exactly. Yeah. If there's anything that we can help with Startup Angels, if we can help you guys launch your business or take your company and give yourself the support that you need just to focus on your company and not focus about fundraising, you can always reach out to us.
Indeed. Cool. I would say let's just take 2 more questions, and then I believe we can call the event. Okay.
Awesome.
Come back next week for the next Perk Series event, okay? And it's amazing, as you see, if you give us the question also before the event, so we can get prepared and try to help you out with everything that you need.
Definitely. I'll go ahead and pick 2 more questions. So I see a question from Rob: how useful are accelerators versus VCs for startups? I would highly recommend, if you're looking for that extra support, to go for accelerators, because not only do they give you that pre-seed money, but they also come with tons and tons of mentors. They come with a huge network of investors that they will introduce you to, which are awesome introductions to get. And it gives you a little bit of credibility. So when we would go around and say like, hey, we're a 500 startups company, people would take those meetings and respond to cold outreach way more than they would without it. So I would recommend accelerators if you're looking for that extra support. How important is it to have an exit strategy before seeking funding? Is there a standard way to distribute equity for investing, or is this negotiated case by case? So an exit strategy, I think it's just good to have one in mind. It's also good to just be on the same page as your other founders. It's so far down the line that things are going to change, but just being all aligned when you go into those investor meetings is what's most important. Is there a standard way to negotiate that equity for investing? Yeah, so it's going to be negotiated investor by investor. They all have different things that they care about and that they want. Some will want board seats, some won't, things like that. there's no standard way of doing it, but the best way, and I keep repeating myself, is to talk to people they've already invested in and get the kind of terms that they had and figure out what's your best case for negotiating.
Awesome. Awesome. Guys, my last piece of recommendation, really understand exactly what stage you're in. Because if you're too early stage, again, trying to go after angel or VC, it might just be tough and might discourage you. And it's not because you're not doing a good job. It's just because your business might be just a little too early. Okay. And this is really what I've seen happening to over 85% of startup in their early stage. They start focusing on getting funding instead of trying to find a way to keep bootstrapping and get that traction that is necessary for a seed stage. Okay, cool. Well, then for those of you who are not HIE members, I really recommend for 2 reasons. First, it's just a $50 membership per year and gives you access for free to all our events. Now it's going to give you access to amazing perk discount, like all that Startup Angels, for example, is offering you, among with all the many others that we're going to present to you in the coming weeks. And we have HIE Connect, that it's a little bit like an internal LinkedIn, where you can find co-founders, where you can find the recording of this event, for example. Okay, so think about it. If you are not an HIE member, become one. And with that said, guys, this has been great and happy to help. We're here to support you succeed. Have a really good day. Thank you, Saniya.
Bye, everyone. Thank you for
Thank you
attending.
so much for having me.